Hi everyone, I'm Reuben, and forgive me my voice or if I pull funny face expression because I just sprained my back on the long flight here, and sometimes you see me wince in pain, so that's not because I'm having a problem, but yeah. So today I'm going to talk about privacy and decentralization on the blockchain, two very important topics that it's often misunderstood. Most people don't actually, everyone's like saying, 2018 is the year of the privacy coin, it's the year of the decentralized exchange, and actually most people don't quite understand what privacy on the blockchain is. And I guess the first, does this work? So this is just an overview of the stuff that we'll be covering in this presentation. We'll first, explain why we need privacy on the blockchain and how it's like in Bitcoin. And we'll talk a bit about, difference between IP address privacy and blockchain privacy. This is a very big misunderstanding where many privacy coins are claiming to be private C coins when they don't actually protect you. We'll then talk about, existing types of anonymization methods. And we'll talk about Zerocoin in particular, which is the technology behind Zcoin, and how we are seeking to improve it. We are often confused with Zero Cash, which is the technology behind Zcash. So just an overview of some of those differences. And we'll later talk about our decentralization technology, why we think proof of work is still interesting, especially now, like everyone's like moving to proof of stake. And then we'll talk a bit about our MTP and Z nodes. But in general, hopefully at the end of this talk, you have a better understanding of privacy in general in blockchain, not just about Zcoin, or you will probably understand a little bit more about Zencash, Zcash, and all this other stuff as well. Oops, why am I back here? Okay, so just some key stats of Zcoin. We're about 200 million market cap, around 44. This stuff that you can check out here. And basically, the main thing is that a lot of us ask, why do we need privacy on the blockchain? Isn't Bitcoin anonymous? If I'm doing nothing wrong, why do I need to hide? And if you take a look at it, if you think about it, traditional systems like banking systems, they already do offer some sort of financial privacy. Not anyone can check your bank account and transactions. But it's kind of different on the blockchain because every single transaction that has ever happened on the blockchain is publicly and permanently viewable on the blockchain. So, people saying like, Bitcoin is anonymous because you don't know who owns the address. Later we'll see why that isn't really the case. And, if you think about it, like, I'm not doing anything illegal, why do I want to hide it? But if you think about it, what are the things that you consider private in your life? A lot of people say your messaging, who you are, and like your identity is one of the things. But one of the things that are really, really private is your financial activity. This kind of things like, do you want everyone in the world to know how much you own, who you're transacting with? And this is really, really private information. And often, some people don't even share it with their spouses. So if you think about it as well, businesses are going to use a public blockchain. Not necessarily they want their competitors to know who they're dealing with, who they're buying from. And this is an important factor in a so-called decentralized currency. You need an element of privacy. And the other idea is, the very horrible words called fungibility. Basically that, one coin should be indistinguishable from another. And it's supposed, Bitcoin is always promoted as fungible. But if you take a look, every single coin in Bitcoin has a history, has a story. It's gone through many hands. And if you think about it, like for example, in the US, 90% of US dollars are tainted with traces of cocaine. But at the same time, you're not going to go arrest everyone that has a dollar note with traces of cocaine because it's fungible. You don't really know how many steps it's been. But for example, let's say in Bitcoin, there's something like a Silk Road, something happened, and somehow you just managed to transact with this guy. Maybe you sold something to the drug dealer without knowing. Maybe you just bought a meal or something like that. And suddenly, it becomes, if for whatever reason that particular drug dealer gets seized and everything, suddenly I can prove that within 2 steps you were connected to this drug deal. And that may not be the case. You may just be an innocent vendor. And that's a problem that you shouldn't have to care about. If I'm having $1 in my hand, I don't have to care where it's been. And similarly, in digital currency, that should be the case as well. So let's take a look at so-called privacy in Bitcoin, why it isn't enough. And the idea is that there's a basic conflict in blockchain where you are trying to have, blockchain is all about transparency. Every single transaction's there. Everyone knows, the balances, so everyone can verify that. And that's the problem. How do you actually retain privacy in a system that's transparent and that records every transaction? It's a real problem, and that's why it's not easy to come up with privacy solutions. And so actually privacy in Bitcoin is actually just pseudonymous, in meaning that yes, I don't know who owns this address, but I can see all the activities of this coin. And of course, people can create a new Bitcoin address for every single transaction, so it's harder to discern behavior from a single address. But the fact is that this alone is not good enough because we are humans. We transact in typical human behaviors. We transact with exchange, we transact with a merchant. And if you think about it, it's kind of like a crossword puzzle. Let's say if I know the address of this exchange, and let's say I know the address of this merchant. Once I start seeing the patterns and the relationships between the transactions and addresses, I get a good idea of who you are. So, I may not know immediately, but once I pull other sources of information, it's almost become like a transparent ledger. Right now, we aren't seeing this quite yet, but I think it's only just a matter of time. If you take a look, there are companies called blockchain analysis firms that actually, this entire job is to find out who owns this address, how much this person has, and this is already happening today. And now they are like publicly available tools to do this type of blockchain analysis. So if you think about it, do you really want to okay, how much Bitcoin you have, how much Bitcoin and who you paid to? And that's the problem. Right now we may not feel it, but I think in the coming 2-3 years, you never know. Right? And so a lot of people misunderstand this. There's some coins that claim Tor privacy or I2P privacy enough. So the idea is that what is IP address privacy? So IP address is an address that identifies you on the internet. And of course you can hide this with VPNs and Tor, but it doesn't actually provide any kind of additional privacy in the sense that the relationships between the transactions are still transparent on the blockchain. All you're doing is trying to hide where the origin of that transaction is, which actually isn't that easy at all. Then, of course, there are other techniques. Instead of just using a VPN, there's something called Dandelion, which I wouldn't go into, but you should just Google it up. The other thing is that we are providing blockchain privacy solutions, which means that we are not just hiding your IP address. Now, first of all, if you take a look at on the blockchain, there's no record of your IP address. If I want to sort of pinpoint a transaction with an IP address, I would actually have to monitor the entire network and try to see where that transaction originally was first seen. So it's not trivial to do that. But with blockchain privacy, I don't need to do that because it's a permanent record. I can take all the time I need to find the relationships. And yeah, basically behavior and links are the primary ways to de-anonymize you. And of course, once you do other sort of data analysis and have new data points, that becomes a lot more easier. So we talked about zero coin and zero knowledge proofs, but it's first worth talking about previous type of anonymization techniques. I think the most famous ones would be Dash and Monero. And basically, they all function in a way kind of like, so Dash, how it does it is actually, I have one person, and I find maybe 4 other people, and everyone puts in 1 coin in, and then later on it kind of mixes it up, and I pull another 1 coin out. So I'm not sure which was the original coin that I put in. So it gives you sort of plausible deniability. Now the problem with that type of system is that first of all, you're limited by the number of people that are actively wanting the mix. Because if you think about it, I have to find people that mix. Of course the protocol helps you to find, but the fact that I have to actively find people that mix. And on top of that, you have to trust the mixer a bit, in the sense that you may record your IP address, you may record how the mixing was done, and it requires active participation. Now, if anyone has uses like private send in Dash, it's quite painful to use. I was involved in Dash very early on, and if you take a look, sometimes it takes days to anonymize a big amounts of funds because you need to quickly find people to mix with. And that's a real problem. It also reduces your anonymity because those people have to be actively online. Now with Monero actually improved on this. They use something called ring signatures, and now instead of having to have people online, the system actually picks up outputs from previous transactions and automatically mixes them. Basically, they are taking one transaction and finding dummy inputs to make into a transaction. So basically, the anonymity is a lot better in the sense that I don't have to actively mix with anybody, but still the anonymity set per transaction is relatively low because I'm usually finding in a typical Monero transaction, I think it's a ring signature of 5. So what that means is that I try to find 4 other inputs, 4 other outputs to make into an input. That means in that transaction, I have possible deniability of 1 and 5. But then again, it's still, it's okay. But the trail still exists. It's still a probability. It's just obscure. It's like, just having like a bunch of body doubles, doing the same activities like a dummy, and I'm just trying to hide my activity in this group of people. And again, it's only on a per transaction basis. So let's take a look at how zero-knowledge proofs actually seek to improve this, right? It's a really exciting new technology. And what is a zero-knowledge proof? A zero-knowledge proof is the proof that you know a piece of information without giving out the information itself. That means I only prove. So let's take a look at this. This is what we call the Alibaba cave example. And basically here, Victor is the guy outside, Peggy is the person that's proving to Victor. And Peggy wants to prove to Victor that she has the passcode to this little trapdoor here, but she doesn't want to tell Victor the passcode. So how does she prove to Victor that she has the passcode? So what she does is she goes in, and then Victor will call, okay, come out from A or come out from B. And every time, Peggy will come out from the right door. So she does this millions and millions of times. Obviously, Victor, with a very high degree of probability, says, yes, Peggy has proved that she has the passcode to this door without actually giving out any information about the passcode itself. This is a very simple analogy of what a zero-knowledge proof. So how does it is used in an anonymization system? It might seem like totally different, right? And basically, Zerocoin, what it allows you to do is to take a particular coin and burn it up. That means you're basically destroying the coin, and this is what we call a Zerocoin mint. And after that, at any time in the future, you can redeem a new coin, but that coin has no previous transaction history. It looks like it was being freshly mined. So basically, you're just wiping the transaction history. And where the zero-knowledge proof comes in is to prove that I did indeed burn a coin without actually showing which coin I burned. So I just show a zero-knowledge proof that I burned a coin, and therefore that allows me to redeem a new coin. And yeah, this is actually also particularly useful in voting. There's a lot of talk about voting, but one of the problems with voting on the blockchain is the, kind of like the privacy element. You don't necessarily want to know which way, give out which way you voted. And zero-knowledge proofs allow this. I can prove that I voted without showing which way I voted. So that's something we're actually trying to work on in small levels and local government levels in the Thai government. So hopefully that pans out. So what are the pros and cons of Zerocoin? Actually, like any privacy technology has its own set of trade-offs. And one of the good things of Zerocoin, there's no need for a mixer. I don't need to find people to mix with. I have very high anonymity sets because my set is not just based on the transaction basis, but basically on everyone that has burnt the coin. I have retained supply auditability in the sense that if there's a hack, I know that the supply checks out or not. And we're using cryptography that is not novel. We use the discrete logarithm problem, so if that breaks, the least of your problems would be Zcoin. You probably would be more worried about your internet and banking transactions. One of the cons, or like the sort of like drawbacks of Zerocoin, is that for each Zerocoin transaction, it's typically 25 kilobytes, and that's pretty huge. If you think about it, a typical Bitcoin transaction is about 500 bytes. It requires something called a trusted setup. A trusted setup is what we call something that I need to set it, certain initial parameters that I need to generate first, and then I need to destroy it. If I hold the keys to that trusted setup and I didn't destroy it properly, this would actually allow forgery of the coins. So this is a big issue with trusted setup, and we'll show you what we're doing to fix that. And the other thing is that some care is required when doing zero coin mints and spends, because some people, they're not really smart. They do destroy the coin and immediately redeem, destroy the coin, immediately to redeem. So yes, although mathematically I can't prove it, but statistically, like, oh, maybe this is the same person that keeps on doing this. So these are some of the drawbacks. And so now we come to differences between zero cash and zero coin. So zero cash is a technology used in Zcash. Okay, Zcash, Zencash, Komodo, Z-Classic, oh, I picked Komodo twice, BTC Private, all of these schemes use the zero cash protocol. And basically the only one that's actually like doing innovation in this regard is the original team, the Zcash team. The rest are just taking the implementation. This has no relation to the zero coin protocol. It has the same kind of principles of zero coin in the sense that it allows burning and redeeming, but it also allows direct send while it's in a burn state. That means, like, let's say if I burn in a zero coin, now I can send it to other balances without actually having to bring it back into the main chain. It has really small proof sizes. It's only something about 200 bytes and very quick verification times. But there are certain drawbacks to this. They are using something called ZK snarks, and it requires a very complex trusted setup. So for us, our trusted setup, which probably you can ask me later, is quite simple. But for them, they require like a multi-party computation. Their first round, I think, involved 6 people going into a desert, and each of them like destroying their own parameters. And one guy called Peter Todd, he's a real, considered like a Bitcoin developer, and he was actually not happy with how this trusted setup was set up, and believes that a backdoor could have been inserted then. And because of that, he's taken down his post, he's been denouncing zero cash. Well, okay, we don't know how true that is, but the fact that there is controversy over this trusted setup problem. And what does that mean? Because if I have breached this trusted setup or inserted a backdoor, basically I can forge coins on Zcash. I can create new coins. And the problem is that, okay, you have trusted setup, you're using untested cryptography, but then combined in the way that, because in the way they're set up, where you can't even see the amounts, you lose supply auditability. And it's kind of like you have a trusted setup, you have untested cryptography, and you have lack of supply auditability. What that means is that if the cryptography breaks or the trusted setup was backdoored, attacker can generate coins out of thin air and not be detected. And that's a real problem, because if you take a look, Zero Cash has gone through many audits, and some of these audits have returned, issues with this type of cryptography. So it's not as if it's a really remote possibility. And we have seen, in so many cases where, like even the DAO went through so many like security audits, but it still has a problem. So, we really like what Zcash is doing. They're really pushing the envelope, but we feel that, Zcoin has a place as well. And so basically, Zcash and Zero Cash, basically they're the best anonymity set, very fast performance, and there's lots of other stuff that they can do as well. But as we said, they're using really untested cryptography here. It also means that in a way that if there's any issues, you can't detect it. So what are we actually trying to do? We took a look at Zero Coin. We're talking about the large proof sizes. And we talk about the trusted setup. And right now we are developing something with the replace Zero Coin, where we can reduce proof sizes to 1 to 2 kilobytes, potentially using bulletproofs. We have a faster verification in Zero Coin. So we're basically solving almost most of the issues that is seen in sort of Zero Coin, and maybe even Zero Cash, because we don't have the trusted setup issue, we don't have the exotic cryptography issue. So that's really something interesting that we're hoping to be, another privacy implementation that has real value. We have 2 PhD cryptographer researchers working on this, and we'll hopefully publish an academic paper relatively soon on this. So that's the privacy element. And one of the things that we need to talk about is, a lot of people ask us, wait, why is Zcoin concentrating on proof of work? Everyone's been moving to a proof of stake type of system. So for those of you who don't know, proof of work is basically miners do work, consume power and computational power to do so. All these basic things. Miners are rewarded of a blockchain, and there actually is no need to hold existing coins to acquire the block reward. While with proof of stake, instead of actually doing work, you just hold a coin and you have a chance to solve a block proportionate to the numbers you have. There's very little work, and so it's always considered that proof of stake is more energy efficient in the sense that very little energy is burned to save it. And it's also often seen that proof of stake is more efficient in the sense that there's a lot more scalability solutions for proof of stake. So why are we still working on proof of work? Now, we first have to realize that we are not a smart contract platform. We are not a utility token or anything like that. We are primarily aiming to be a cryptocurrency. And okay, first of all, we often say that proof of work is the more tested version of security. Doesn't suffer issues, nothing at stake, which you can just Google up. But the other argument is that, instead of being totally virtual, with mining, there's a real world cost because power and hardware needs to be expanded to generate new coins. But to me, the most important thing is that as a matter of distribution, if I am to be a successful currency, I need to have my coin in as many hands as possible and people using them. So the problem with proof of stake is that it kind of encourages like a hodler mentality, and that's okay for other type of systems. But if you're a currency, the people securing your network are the same people that are holding your coins, and you're earning money by holding the coins. As a result, that what it means that, well, I might as well hold these coins and be rich rather than use this coin. And we're already seeing this problem with Bitcoin. And just imagine if you have proof of stake, that kind of makes it worse. And as I said, there's now, if you use proof of work, there's a separation of power between those who secure the network, the miners, and those who own the coins. It's more kind of decentralized in that sense, because now I don't just have to convince the holders, but I also have to convince the miners to do anything. Now, of course, it's less important in smart contract platforms where high throughput, high TPS is more important than distribution and decentralization. Like for example, in EOS, there's only like 21 block producers. With NEO, it's like 7 validator nodes that were centrally appointed by the NEO Council. And this, some people say, yeah, that's really bad, but most people accept it as a sort of necessary evil to have because to achieve high throughput. And Bitcoin's early days where anyone could mine it with their own computer and get some coins and have some fun things to do with, casual mining basically, was allowing people to participate in this economy. And Bitcoin then was a real nice utopia. Now it's like, to the moon, Lambo and stuff like that. But that back then, it was more of like an idea that I wanted to participate in this new economy. And I could do it with my existing hardware and computer. It was an excellent distribution mechanism because anyone could come in, turn on the computer and get a few coins. But then what happened was the mining farms came, and where I come from, most people don't know much about blockchain technology, and people always come to me, well, I want to get into cryptocurrency, teach me how to do mining, and I'll show them this picture, and I'm like, do you really want to compete with this? And the whole issue right now is that Bitcoin mining is a very centralized process. Not anyone can do it. You need specialized hardware to do it. And if you take a look at it, it's like, there are only a handful of manufacturers that do come out with this specialized machines called ASICs. Bitmain, Halong Mining, I'm not sure what's the latest on that. And you have a couple of like Avalon and a few other miners on that. But the point is that it's a real problem because they can control the supply, and they're going to sell it to you at a price that makes sense to them, because if they could be mining on themselves, why should they sell it to you, right? So they're going to be inflating the price to sell to you, and I need all this specialized hardware to do it. And let's say if Bitmain doesn't like you and forces you to mine Bitcoin Cash, that's also a problem. It's a kind of centralization of power in itself. Bitcoin isn't as decentralized as we originally thought. And if you think about it, the only way for a regular Joe to get Bitcoin now is to go to an exchange or to buy it off someone. There's no way that you can just turn your computer on and earn the thing. You need to get this specialized machine that may not even break even. So, yeah. So what are we trying to do? We came out with an algorithm, well, we didn't came out, we implemented it from an academic paper. And basically, we're trying to bring back the old days of Bitcoin, right? Where anyone with a computer can just contribute to the hash rate and get some coins. And previous attempts have kind of been like stopgap solutions. I think the first kind of people that tried to do it was Litecoin. Litecoin came out with script. And the idea was that, once you use memory, it's going to be hard to develop an ASIC miner. And the problem is that they use only 128 kilobytes of memory, so it's actually a trivial amount. And you take a look at Litecoin mining now, or Dogecoin mining now, it's all dominated by ASICs again. Not as efficient as Bitcoin miners, but still a lot more. And now, with the whole, kerfuffle over like Monero, now there's like a new ASIC miner that came out by Bitmain that also does it like a few hundred times more efficient than a GPU can. And they also only use about 2 megabytes of memory because any further bigger amount there would affect performance. So, of course, Monero's now like, let's change it every 6 months. Seems to be a stopgap solution. Of course, now they're looking at alternative algorithms, but hey, we're trying to do something different. Ethereum is, if you take a look at it, it only allocates the memory once every 100 hours, which then you can share with other miners. So it's not actually truly memory hard. So what are we trying to do with MTP here? We're trying to say that, okay, MTP, we're going to allow you to require the miner to use large amounts of memory and also to use it intensely. So even though you develop an ASIC for it, most of the time you'll be spent interacting with the memory and waiting for the memory. And also because of the size of the memory, let's say in our implementation, we'll probably use 4 gigabytes of RAM. And we tested this and we can go even up to like 10 gigabytes of RAM and still remain relatively fast to verify. So if you think about it, like, okay, why the previous things like script or Monero did not just have a very high memory requirement? Because what happens then is that if they bump up the memory requirement, what happens then is the verifiers, the nodes, also have to have the same amount of memory. Meaning that if, let's say, my algorithm requires 5 gigabytes of memory to make, my node also needs 5 gigabytes of memory to verify. And that's really bad because it means that the nodes will be choked up processing these transactions and I can DOS them to bring them down. Well, MTP is interesting. It's what we call asymmetric proof-of-work, meaning that although we require the miners to work really hard, to actually verify the transaction, you need almost very, very little memory. And one of the interesting elements is that although previous ASIC resistant algorithms, because they were CPU friendly, they were actually exposed to botnets. And botnets are basically infected computers that mine on behalf. So Monero had a really big botnet mining it for a very long time. And they said that it was not a problem because it's preventing botnets from doing other stuff. I beg to differ, but basically botnets are a problem. It's a form of centralization. The botnet owners own the hash rate. So what we do is that by requiring large amounts of memory, if your computer is infected in mining Zcoin or with MTP, you're more likely going to notice it because we're consuming so much memory resources. So that's the theory, and hopefully we'll see how that pans out. So we actually funded research to improve MTP. We were actually supposed to release it last year, but certain flaws were found. So we contributed research to find improvements. And we had really cool people like ex-Googlers and like world-class researchers contribute to our research. And they came out with a new paper in January 2008. And we were hoping to aim for testnet release in about 2 months. So this is a Z notes. It's not that exciting, but a lot of people love it. But basically, the idea is that with traditional type of currencies, only the miners are being rewarded. In here, we allocate part of the block reward to also reward people who maintain the network. And we have around like 2,800, maybe 3,000 nodes around the world. And the idea is that because with privacy, there's always a trade-off in the sense that, you take a look, 25 kilobytes, larger proof sizes. And as time goes on, it's going to take a lot of resources to maintain it. And we don't expect people to do this for free. This was a problem for Bitcoin. So in general, we decide, okay, part of the block reward should also be given back to those people who actually maintain the blockchain, storing the blockchain, and also propagating the blocks. And the other thing that we have some stuff that we're thinking about what we're going to do with this other layer of infrastructure. Of course, now the whole hot topic is about Lightning Network and stuff like that. But there are also other on-chain sort of scaling solutions that we can explore, that even Dash are also exploring, that would benefit from a sort of incentivized infrastructure where I can ask people who are maintaining this infrastructure to upgrade because they're being paid to do so, which you can't really do in a Bitcoin environment. Because you look at it, who's going to dedicate, like on a 256 gigabyte SSD, am I going to dedicate 160 gigabytes for the goodness of my heart? Probably not. And yeah, so that ends my presentation, and if you have any questions.